I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily Week in Review. Several Canadian politicians are facing discipline for taking trips abroad during a holiday season marked by public health advice to stay home. Manitoba Senator Don Platt is still waiting to see if he will face any penalty for traveling briefly to Mexico. His fate as leader of the Conservatives in the upper chamber rests with his fellow Conservative senators who elect their Senate leader. The growing scandal has seen other elected officials across the country reprimanded. Well, meanwhile, Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe is calling opposition criticism of former Highways Minister Joe Hargrave's explanation for his recent trip to California irrelevant. Mr. Moe has accepted Mr. Hargrave's resignation after he traveled to California in late December to sell a vacation home and move back his belongings. The NDP have accused Mr. Hargrave of providing a bogus story about needing to travel. Premier Moe says the issue is the perception that there are two sets of rules, one for government politicians and one for everyone else. A new poll conducted by Leger and the Association for Canadian Studies has found that 87% of Canadians said that they would support a total ban on international travel until there are several consecutive days of reduced numbers of COVID-19 cases. More than 1,500 people were contacted for the survey. Today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says people who leave the country for non-essential reasons will not be allowed to access the government's sickness benefit when they return. While Canadians were asked to stay home this past holiday, a new survey shows that nearly half of the respondents decided to visit someone else's house. Pollsters asked 1,506 people about their holiday plans, with 48% admitting that they got together with family and friends outside their home. Public health officials have feared a massive increase in COVID-19 transmissions could follow a looser holiday where Canadians didn't limit their contact with others. Hundreds of health experts in Canada are calling for more aggressive measures to stop airborne spread of COVID-19. Their concerns are detailed in an open letter addressed to Canada's Chief Public Health Officer, Federal Health Minister, and provincial premiers and medical officers. The experts want public health messages to more strongly warn of the risk posed in closed spaces, especially with winter forcing more people indoors. Health officials in Ontario say they have confirmed 3 more cases of the new, faster-spreading strain of COVID-19. The new diagnoses mean that the province has had at least 6 infections related to the virus strain, which first came to prominence in the UK. Health officials say that the new cases are either linked to travel or a close contact of someone who has traveled. Ontario Premier Doug Ford concedes that there have been some bumps in the road getting vaccines administered to people in the province. But Premier Ford says he is confident that the province will be in high gear in the end. The Premier spoke shortly after a healthcare worker became the first person in Ontario to receive a second dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. BC health officials are aiming to vaccinate more than 500,000 people against COVID-19 by the end of March.
Our focus for the next month till the end of January, so from the doses we received already to February, is residents and staff of long-term care. And we have said that from the very beginning. Those are the people that we know need our protection most.
After that, Dr. Bonnie Henry says the homeless in shelters and paramedics transporting long-term care residents will be given priority. A federal NDP member of parliament is coming under fire for a Twitter post on Israel's vaccination policy. Charlie Angus retweeted a newspaper article that highlighted how Palestinians in the Israeli-occupied West Bank and Gaza are not among the beneficiaries of Israel's rapid rollout of COVID-19 vaccines, but the region's Jewish settlements are. B'nai B'rith Canada responded by saying Mr. Angus was tweeting inaccurate information demonizing Israel. Mr. Angus replied that the Jewish advocacy group was accusing him of promoting anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Several families say that they have received little to nothing of their loved ones' possessions back after Iranian forces shot down a Ukrainian passenger jet almost a year ago. Rihanna Durrani got back 2 rings that her father was wearing on his right hand. Her father took the fateful flight because the one that her mother was on was full. There were 138 people on board with ties to Canada. Sergeant Andrew Harnett, who was 37, pulled over an SUV in Calgary last week and was hit and dragged when the vehicle took off. He died about an hour later. The 17-year-old alleged driver and 19-year-old Amir Abdul Rahman have made their first court appearances by phone, charged with first-degree murder. Police in Calgary held a formal procession today for the body of Sergeant Harnett from the medical examiner's office to the funeral home. Stay tuned. This past week, we covered new developments in the fight against COVID-19 and answered all your questions about the new strain of the virus in our TIA Health medical segment with Dr. Abhishek Raut. Stay tuned for this story and more on Forum Daily Week in Review. New hurdles are emerging in the new year as Canada continues its battle against the virus that took control of the world last year. Our national coronavirus case count has exceeded 611,000 infections, resulting in about 16,000 deaths in Canada due to COVID-19. 2 approved vaccines are being distributed across the country through the National Vaccination Program, having inoculated over 121,000 people with either Moderna or Pfizer-BioNTech vaccines. Meanwhile, a new variant of the virus has begun popping up in Canada, one that was first seen in the UK and is said to be more contagious than the first coronavirus strain. Well, to talk more on these recent developments in our TIA Health medical segment, we are joined by Dr. Abhishek Raut, Medical Director at Apple Tree Medical Group. Doctor, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me today.
So, how has the holiday season affected the fight against the coronavirus in Canada?
So predictably so, we've seen a massive increase over the holidays there. While everyone did promise to stay safe, everyone's Instagram says something a little bit different. On December 22nd, we saw about 6,000 cases across Canada. And in the coming days, we saw 7,000, 8,000, 9,000, and peaking at 10,000 cases in January 2nd. Luckily, after the spike, I suspect we'll see a nice decline in cases as well.
Now, we have 2 vaccines currently being circulated across the country. However, only about 0.3% of the national population has actually received the shot, while hundreds of thousands of doses are still stored in freezers. So, Dr. Raut, should this vaccination program be scaled up?
Absolutely. If you look at the first vaccine, it was actually administered in Canada December 14th. And since then, only about 121,000 people have received the shots. So most of the provinces have about 70% of their stock in freezers. And PEI is probably the only province that has even come close to the 1% of their population. So based on that alone, I think we really do need a full-scale, massive rollout in order to meet our deadlines.
So how can Canada speed up its vaccination program?
So they've done a few things that are very important. Step 1 is always to target groups and put group populations into phases 1, 2, and 3. The second step is to really target hospitals and long-term care homes with targeted preventative programs. So going into the long-term care homes, going into the hospitals. Step 3 is to utilize all of our community resources to expand our program. So that means our family medicine clinics, our walk-in clinics, our pharmacies, and even our schools. Remember, we still do vaccinations in schools for multiple diseases, so we should certainly be utilizing that as well.
And what do we know so far about the differences between the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine and the Moderna vaccine?
The Pfizer vaccine, it has to be kept at -70 during transport and storage, so it's a bit harder to keep it at that level, and it can only stay in the refrigerator for 5 days. The Moderna can stay at -20 in storage and about 30 days in conventional refrigerator. We don't expect any of these vaccines will be in a conventional refrigerator for very long because they'll just be giving out the vaccines there. But overall, both very exciting prospects for vaccination.
And are there any benefits to receiving one over the other?
Not really. Both vaccinations have an efficacy rate above 90%, so we don't consider that to be an issue. The most important thing here is to get vaccinated as soon as possible. And the worst thing someone could do is to wait and just try to figure out which one is slightly better.
All right, Dr. Raut, I really want to get into this new variant of COVID-19 that's popping up in Canada. What does the medical community know so far about this variant?
What we know is it's called the B.1.1.7 variant. There are about 22 to 23 different coding changes in the virus genome. And these changes, unfortunately, mean that the virus can spread much faster. In fact, the concern that it can spread 70% more transmissibility than the current strains.
Now, there's another new strain in South Africa. So I'm wondering, why is the virus acting this way and mutating into new variants?
Yeah, well, we do expect mutations, especially with coronaviruses in general, influenza viruses. We see that we have to get new flu shots every year for that. So it's not surprising to see this type of mutation after almost 6 to 9 months here.
And how effective are the current coronavirus vaccines against this new variant in Canada and the UK?
So we've been extremely lucky. So far, all of the identified variants have not mutated enough to be ineffective against the current vaccines and the prospective vaccines. So what does that mean? Our strategy stays the same. Keep on vaccinating and vaccinate as much as possible.
All right, Doctor, we've got about 30 seconds left, but would speeding up vaccinations across the country also have an impact on the speed that this virus mutates?
It's a very valuable question, actually, and the answer is a resounding yes. Every time a person gets COVID-19, their body becomes essentially almost a mutation lab for possible new strains. So the more we vaccinate, the less people will catch COVID-19, the less viral load in the community, and the less chances of mutation.
All right, Dr. Rat, thank you again for your time today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Don't go away. A look across the country from this past week coming up after the break, starting in BC. BC Premier John Horgan is asking British Columbians to hang in there as they work to control COVID-19 numbers. The plea comes as the province extends its state of emergency. Mr. Horgan says vaccines may bring hope for the new year, but he wants people to keep following public health orders. The province first declared a state of emergency on March 18th last year. COVID-19 has infected another 130 Manitobans and claimed the lives of 7 more. Health officials say that the province is dealing with more than 4,400 active cases, with 243 people in hospital and 35 in intensive care. Meanwhile, Progressive Conservative MLA James Teitzema is one of the latest politicians to find himself under a negative spotlight. Mr. Teitzema traveled between Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia over the holidays, despite public health advice not to do so. Saskatchewan has vaccinated its first long-term care resident against COVID-19. The province says that the shot went to a man in the village of Île-à-la-Crosse, nearly 500 kilometers north of Saskatoon. Health officials plan to use the Moderna vaccine in long-term care homes and in remote communities because it's easier to transport than the Pfizer-BioNTech version, which needs ultra-cold storage. The government reported 5 more deaths yesterday and 153 new infections, with 166 people in hospital. 31 of those receiving intensive care. Manitoba's opposition New Democrats are not impressed by Premier Brian Pallister's cabinet shuffle that took health away from Cameron Friesen. NDP leader Wab Kinew says it's very telling that Mr. Friesen has been moved out of the portfolio. He says it shows the failings of the Premier and Mr. Friesen. Heather Stephenson moves from the family's portfolio to health and seniors care. Or Audrey Gordon is the Minister of a new mental health, wellness and recovery cabinet post. There is growing speculation that Newfoundland and Labrador's Liberal government is preparing for an election campaign as early as next month. CBC is reporting that there has been a flurry of nominations for candidates and fundraising efforts appear to be in high gear. Both the governing Liberals and the opposition Progressive Conservatives have released slick campaign-style ads spotlighting their leaders. Premier Andrew Furey took over for former Premier Dwight Ball last summer. Fashion mogul Peter Nygaard is expected to seek bail today following his arrest in Winnipeg last month on charges he faces in the United States of using his influence to lure women and girls for sex. Mr. Nygaard, who is 79, was arrested last month under the Extradition Act and faces 9 counts, including racketeering and sex trafficking. Documents from the U.S. allege Mr. Nygaard frequently targeted women and underage girls from disadvantaged economic backgrounds, with promises of modeling and other financial opportunities. Mr. Nygaard's lawyer has said his client denies all allegations. Quebec's Human Rights and Youth Rights Commission is launching an investigation into the death of a 7-year-old girl found Sunday north of Montreal. The investigation will determine whether the girl's rights were violated and whether her death could have been prevented. Officers are investigating whether the girl may have died after suffering some form of injury or mistreatment. Police say they questioned several people in relation to the incident but made no arrests on Sunday. A report says the natural regions that Canada protects don't line up that well with where Canadians actually need them. The paper concludes that the country's vast network of parks isn't adequately safeguarding areas that provide fresh water and recreation to nearby populations. The report is in the journal Environmental Research Letters. It looks at which parts of the country are able to provide fresh water, carbon storage, and recreational opportunities. The new operator of the White Rose offshore oil field says no final decision has been made about its future. That's despite a move by partner Suncor to take a $425 million impairment charge on the value of its stake. In a news release, Suncor says the purchase of operator Husky Energy by Calgary rival Cenovus has cast doubt on the future of the East Coast project and its partly built $2.2 billion West White Rose extension. Cenovus announced the close of its all-stock friendly takeover of Husky Energy earlier on Monday. Nintendo says it's reached an agreement to acquire Vancouver-based video game development company Next Level Games. It says it plans to make the company with 50 employees a wholly owned subsidiary in a deal expected to close on March 1st. Next Level Games recently worked with Nintendo to develop software titles for its 3DS and Nintendo Switch systems, including titles in the Luigi Mansion series. The deal is subject to approval under the Investment Canada Act and by shareholders. Stay with us. We take you around the world after the break, starting in the U.S., where lawmakers gathered to record the Electoral College votes to affirm presidential elections. Meanwhile, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange was denied bail by a British judge, and Hong Kong arrested 53 activists under its new national security law. We'll be right back with these stories and more on the Forum Daily Week in Review. Stay with us. During a joint session of U.S. Congress today, lawmakers will record the votes of the Electoral College and certify President-elect Joe Biden's win. But dozens of Republicans say they will oppose the proceedings. U.S. President Donald Trump is expected to address supporters who have descended on the U.S. Capitol to cheer on his claims of election fraud. Meanwhile, U.S. Democrat Raphael Warnock won one of Georgia's 2 Senate runoffs, but his opponent, Republican Kelly Loeffler, is not conceding.
So I come before you tonight as a man who knows that the improbable journey that led me to this place in this historic moment in America could only happen here. We were told that we couldn't win this election. But tonight, we prove that with hope, hard work, and the people by our side, anything is possible.
With the victory, Mr. Warnock becomes the first black senator in his state's history. His win also brings the Democrats one step closer to control of the Senate. A federal appeals court has kept on hold 2 Arkansas abortion restrictions. One bans abortions 18 weeks into a woman's pregnancy. The other bans the procedure from being performed because the fetus has Down syndrome. The 8th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals upheld a judge's 2019 ruling temporarily blocking Arkansas from enforcing the laws. A judge in 2019 said the 2 measures unconstitutionally restrict abortion before the point of viability. More restrictions are expected to be proposed during the Arkansas legislative session. Julian Assange will be staying behind bars for the time being after a British judge denied bail to the WikiLeaks founder. Mr. Assange has been in jail since 2019 as he fought extradition to the U.S. to face espionage charges over the publication of secret military documents a decade ago. Earlier this week, the same judge had denied extradition on health grounds, saying the 49-year-old Australian was likely to kill himself if held under harsh U.S. prison conditions. More than 50 former lawmakers and activists had been rounded up and arrested in Hong Kong. The move is being described as the largest against the city's pro-democracy movement since a national security law was imposed last June. A top official said the arrests targeted people suspected of overthrowing or interfering with the Hong Kong government in executing its duties. The lawyer of a Pakistani man convicted and later acquitted in the 2002 killing of American journalist Daniel Pearl says he will petition the Supreme Court to free his client. Mr. Pearl's family and the Pakistani government have appealed the acquittal to the Supreme Court, which resumed its hearing this week. A decision is expected before the end of the month. Mr. Sheikh's lawyer has been trying to get his client, who had been on death row for 18 years, freed since his acquittal. A court in El Salvador has found ex-president Tony Saca and his wife, Ana Leguia de Saca, guilty of illicit enrichment and ordered the two to repay the government $4.4 million. The court said Tuesday that Mr. Saca could not explain the origin of $6.5 million in income he made while president. Mr. Saca will also be barred from holding public office for 10 years. Mr. Saca is already serving a 10-year prison sentence for corruption and has already been ordered to return some $260 million to the state. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has opened his first ruling party Congress in 5 years with an admission of policy failures and a vow to lay out new developmental goals. The Korean Central News Agency reported Wednesday that North Korea kicked off the Workers' Party Congress in Pyongyang on Tuesday with thousands of delegates in attendance. In his opening speech, KCNA cites Kim as saying the previous state developmental goals set in 2016 Congress were not met in almost all areas to a great extent. The 2021 Grammy Awards will no longer take place this month in Los Angeles and will broadcast in March due to a recent surge in coronavirus deaths and cases. The Recording Academy says the annual show will shift from its original January 31st broadcast to an unspecified date in March. Los Angeles County, the epicenter of the crisis in California, has surpassed 10,000 COVID-19 deaths and has had 40% of the deaths in California. And Canadian rock legend Neil Young has become the latest artist to strike gold with his song catalog. The Hypnosis Song Fund, a British investment company, announced that it had acquired a 50% stake in Mr. Young's catalog of some 1,180 songs, including Heart of Gold, Rockin' in the Free World, and Cinnamon Girl. The deal comes a month after Bob Dylan sold his song publishing for a fortune estimated at between $300 million and $500 million. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news from this past week. For news on demand, you can visit our website at thenewsforum.ca and follow us on social media. We'll catch you next time. Take care.